listening to the Jboy Show, your number one source for Auburn and the SEC.
My goal was to run through his soul and grab his heart when I run through his soul. Kurt, Nate, Coach Dye, those are memories.
I think we've established ourselves as, I think, the premier conference in college football.
Now, the SEC is better at the top. It's better in the middle.
The Southeastern Conference remains the premier conference.
Now takes the snap. Looking for the receiver. He's got Lutz and Kirkland. Touchdown, Auburn!
Think about it. It's always been the SEC and everybody else trying to catch it.
I think this is probably the best league from a competitive venue standpoint.
Most capable teams. You just look at those programs, the way they recruit, how they invest.
Snap to Burrow. 3 steps. Fires. Back corner of the end zone. Over the shoulder catch. Did he hold on? He did. Justin Jefferson. Touchdown, Tiger.
And now, your host, Jboy.
Hello, everybody, and thank you again for joining us on another very special edition of the Jboy Show. Joined by a guy that needs no introduction if you're anywhere in the world of college football and junkie at all. You can find him his College Football 2020 preview on philsteele.com. He's a voter on over 20 college football awards, former ESPN insider, a guy that knows everything about everything, and that's Phil Steele. Phil, I really appreciate you coming on, man.
Hey, a real pleasure, Jake. Good talking football with you today.
Definitely, man. Well, let's jump right into it because, I always love looking when you put your top 25 out, I always have, and your preview, I always read it back to front. It's always great stuff. And I've been thinking some questions to ask you because you have some interesting stuff in here, and I'm sure you've gotten asked a ton about it, and I want to start kind of right off the bat, and that's with Texas A&M at 5. My biggest question to you is, do you think this is one of those years, kind of like Jimbo had at Florida State, where it all comes together, Kellen Mond figures it out, or what is it about the Aggies that gives you so much confidence?
Well, it's numerous things, Jake. Going over the team with Coach Fisher last year, 2 things really stood out to me. One was the lack of seniors on the team. They only had 4 or 5 seniors on the entire squad. Mm-hmm. So I knew they were probably a year away last year. And then I looked at that schedule, and it was a hellacious schedule that Texas A&M played. Yeah. And I told Coach Fisher last year, I said, Coach, at the end of the conversation, I said, I'm going to put you on my national magazine cover next year. Because last year they were inexperienced playing a killer schedule. And as it turns out, they took on number 1 ranked Clemson, number 1 ranked Alabama, and number 1 ranked LSU, who plays 3 number 1 teams in the same season. And they also played number 4 Georgia and number 8 Auburn. So 5 top 10 teams with the young squad. Now this year, much different. They have 17 returning starters. I do think Kellen Mond takes that next step this year. He's a hard worker, and they also have running back. They've got Spiller and Smith. The offensive line, I rate number 13 in the country. Defensive line, number 12. Linebackers, defensive backs, both in my top 10. So it's a very talented team. And the schedule gets a lot easier. They're down to number 66 on my schedule difficulty this year. They may only play 1 or 2 top 10 teams as opposed to the 5 they had last year. So I add it all up. I've got A&M favored in almost all of their games this year, with the exception at Alabama, and then the game against Auburn I've got rated as a toss-up on the road. Mm-hmm. But this is a talented A&M team, and Jimbo's brought in 3 really good recruiting classes.
Yeah, and it's something where, again, with this pandemic and not having spring practice, those teams that do have experience, it's almost kind of like a steroid shot to the team just because they've been there, especially up front. And, it's kind of getting crazy now. You saw where the ACC talked about their releasing their all-conference and the +1 deal. If the SEC were to go to that, there was a tweet out yesterday that I believe is pretty accurate, and it would have A&M picking up Florida on the schedule. Would that throw a wrench kind of into the number 5 ranking for you, or is it something where, hey, it's just part of it, and they should have a team that can compete with Florida?
Yeah, they should have a team that can compete with Florida. I think if you look in the power poll in the front of the magazine, I have them up there in the power poll right along with Florida. So I guess it would depend where the game is at, and how was the home crowd for this one, and a lot of factors like that thrown in. So we'll have to see. But I think if prior to the season there was a game at the Swamp, maybe I would have had them a little bit lower, based on a big crowd in the Swamp. But we'll see what happens when it actually happens.
Definitely, and I appreciate you going in depth on that. And again, Phil Steele, it's the best magazine out. Read it back to front. I promise you, you'll feel smarter than you ever have about college football, and you will be. But kind of moving on, my next question, because I was just combing through it, and there's a lot of great stuff in there. And man, I agree with you on a lot of it. And one that jumped out to me, you had USC at number 11, and they've been waiting for Clay Helton to knock that door down out there. It would be huge for him because obviously it's getting a little hot. So, what is it about USC that you really like? Is it the experience that they have returning? Is it some momentum? What is it for you?
The main thing is the talent that they have, and I went over almost all the teams with the Pac-12 head coaches this year, and USC and Oregon are clearly the two most talented teams. You start at the quarterback position. Keaton Slovis is a guy that last year was thrown into the fire and had 30 touchdowns and just 9 interceptions. And go back to USC's losses last year. It's tough for a young quarterback to make their first road start. Usually they struggle in that situation. Well, Slovis was thrown into the fire at BYU, was his first road start, and USC lost that game in overtime by 3. Then Slovis was out with injury. They were down to their number 3 quarterback, and Fink got the road start at Washington. They missed 3 opportunities in the red zone. Could easily have had that game a lot closer than 28-14, but that was a first start for a young quarterback. They went into Notre Dame last year, only lost by 3. So their losses, you could sort of explain them a little bit, and then you just look at the overall talent they have. 17 returning starters, 9 on defense, 8 on offense. I like the running backs. They were all banged up last year. They were down to a 4th, 5th string running back at times. The offensive line was banged up last year. Very few players started all 13 games. The receiving core is still one of the best in the country with Amon St. Brown, Tyler Vaughns, and defensively, once again, the unit was hit hard by injuries. Very few 13-game starters on defense. In fact, I think they had only 1 last year due to the injuries. Now they've got a lot of players back with experience, and Clay Helton's doing a good job recruiting. Plus, Utah takes a step down, and I think when you look at the South, USC is a team that has a chance of actually winning the Pac-12 this year.
Yeah, and I think they've been a sneaky underdog out there, and that, it just makes you think, man, you'd love to see that USC-Alabama game, especially with that passing game of USC, like you were mentioning, against the secondary of Alabama. I think it'd be somewhere it'd be a lot tighter than what I think people would assume, but that's just my opinion. But kind of moving on, I want to ask you before we get into another kind of realm and get into the SEC, talking West and East. Really, with this pandemic, with as much research and as thorough as you are, Phil, and as great as you are at what you do, how has this pandemic kind of affected you? Has it at all? Being able to obviously talk on the phone and Zoom and all that stuff. How different is it for you? Because I'm sure you love going to the places and being able to interact with the people and really dig in there.
Well, actually, the magazine is a 6-month process.
That's what I was going to ask you, if it started before.
Yeah, we start the Sunday after Thanksgiving with the first write-through. On what we do is we read through every article that's written about the team for the year, get a real good feeling for what happened at each position and what to look for in the future, and go ahead and do that first write-through. And that's usually November, December, and in through January. Then the second write-through process begins. Once the freshmen have signed, players have left early for the NFL, transfers coming in and out, you make your adjustments at that point. Now, the third write-through process, I talk to the coaches, and this year I talked to 110 of the 130 head coaches. That one we had a delay. I mean, we had, the state of Ohio was shut down for about 6 weeks, and I was just in here in an empty office toiling by myself because I couldn't have the staff in. Once the staff was able to return, I said, hey, we're going to do a magazine. Started talking to the coaches via the phone, and that's usually how I do it. Okay. Don't have enough time to travel across the country and meet with each of the coaches. Sometimes I'll talk to 7 head coaches in a day, and the calls last generally about an hour apiece. So it's generally by phone. That hasn't changed. The amount of information I haven't had didn't change. But what did change was We pushed the magazine back. We didn't send it out till July the 8th as opposed to the end of May.
Yeah.
And the second thing was a very limited distribution this year. We normally print a couple 100,000 of these things, and this year we only printed 50,000. It's only available at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million, as opposed to everywhere where it's been all the past years.
Yeah.
Only Barnes & Noble, only Books A Million. I had a lot of people say, hey, I've been driving all over the city looking for it, can't find it. Well, to save your gas, just go to Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Those are the only two places that have it. But the other main thing that came out of it, Jake, was what you touched on earlier. This is a year where experience, I think, is going to be vital. If you have an experienced head coach, experienced coordinators, experienced quarterback, and experienced team overall, like you said, it's going to be like a steroid shot. And I love that analogy. The flip side of the coin, if you're, let's say, Michigan State, get yourself a brand new head coach. Mark D'Antonio steps down after he signs the recruiting class. Took a couple weeks. They bring Mel Tucker in. He has a benefit of 0 spring practices, and he has an inexperienced team. Only 10 returning starters coming back. Number 102 on my experience chart without great knowledge of the team because he hasn't had them for a single practice. Those are the coaches that are really going to struggle this year. So I think you hit that one right on the head, Jake.
Well, I think that's a great point and a great example, and it actually is a great segue to my next question. And really, I guess it's more of an observation. I appreciate the kind words, Phil. I really do. But looking at Auburn, because I feel like with this pandemic, you really hope that you don't get hurt from an experience, standpoint, kind of staying on that track. You don't get hurt up front and at the quarterback position. And if you look at Auburn, they're kind of halfway and halfway. You have a quarterback coming back in Bo Nix that had great experience last year, went down to Death Valley, played Oregon in a neutral site, won that game, beat Alabama. You have him coming back, but you lose a lot on the offensive line and really on the defensive line. They have talented personnel on the defensive line, but again, you don't know until it's under the lights and performing. So, when you look at Auburn and kind of look at him, it almost feels like it could almost be a Jekyll and Hyde team.
Yeah, and, I'm a guy that actually leans a lot on the line of scrimmage, offensive line and defensive line. And if you look at Auburn last year, they had one of the best offensive lines in the country, and they may have had the best defensive line in the country, led by Derek Brown, Marlon Davidson, Big Cat Bryant. As you touched on, while the defensive line is good, I don't think it rates up there at the number 1 or number 2 defensive line in the country this year. And offensive line, I got big time questions. And usually when you have an inexperienced offensive line, it takes a little time to gel. And without the benefit of spring practices, how long will it take to gel? And can you keep Bo Nix healthy? Can you establish the run game? These are all major questions I had when it came to Auburn this year. Now, Auburn showed me last year they can upset some teams. I mean, I thought A&M was going to beat them in College Station. I thought Alabama was going to beat them. Mm-hmm. They pulled 2 big upsets on me last year. So, they've got the talent to play up there. But once again, you look at the experience level, they're number 100 on my experience chart as opposed to being number 59 last year. And that's going to be the big time question this year.
Definitely. And you have a brand new offensive line coach. You bring in Chad Morris, which, a lot of people are excited about. I'm really interested to see kind of how that affects the passing game, how it affects maybe, first down play calling, just the nuanced things that change the game without a ton of people seeing it. But kind of staying in the West, when you're looking at it, and I know obviously your rankings are a reflection of where you think people are going to finish. I think as much as people talk about the West, I think Florida and Georgia in the East is going to be a very interesting battle, especially if this in-conference schedule gets approved and you're adding 2 teams, from the other division, who knows where that leads. But just where we're at right now, when you look at Florida and Georgia, and again, tell me if I'm wrong, I believe you have Georgia 6th, and Florida, I believe 10th or 11th. But it's what do you see in that matchup? Who do you like?
Well, I tell you, it's going to be an epic battle, and I think when the SEC media votes on this in the SEC media days, whenever that happens, you're going to see Florida pick to win the East this year. I think most folks are picking the Gators, and it's probably for a couple of reasons. They've got the veteran quarterback in Kyle Trask, and you got to love what Kyle Trask did last year. Yeah. Trask was a guy who had never even started a high school football game. He's thrown into the starting lineup in college, and then all he does is have 25 touchdowns and just 7 interceptions. Last year's weakness on the offense, probably the offensive line. What we talked about with Auburn, Florida only had one returning starter on the offensive line last year. Well, they struggled. They struggled to run the football mightily. Well, this year they have 4 starters back on the O-line, so I expect a better run game this year. And they almost had a half the yardage rushing as the previous year last year. And then with Trask, you got to figure the offense will be pretty good. And defensively, there's talent throughout, as normal with the Gators. Jeremiah Moon, Slayton up front, Dean and Wilson. And when I looked at Florida and Georgia this year, it was about an 8-month process in the magazine this year instead of the normal 6. About 3.5 months I was picking Florida to win the East, and 4.5 months I was picking Georgia to win the East. And I did go with Georgia. I love Georgia's defense. It's a no-name defense. They don't have all those big-name stars, but what they do is rotate so many players that the players don't get the big stats. But what they do have is my number 5 rated defensive line, best set of linebackers in the country, number 4 DBs. That's a great place to start. Now, you lose your quarterback, but you're bringing Jamie Newman, who did a fantastic job at Wake Forest, especially when he had his receivers healthy, and also JT Daniels from USC. How can you go wrong at quarterback? They've got Zamir White, a year removed from his ACL. Last year he played 1 year off the ACL. Well, this year he's another year removed. That's usually when they thrive. And Zamir White was my number 1 rated running back out of high school. They've got Cook and McIntosh back there. I guess my biggest question mark with Georgia is only 2 returning starters on the offensive line, and they lose their offensive line coach, Sam Pittman. Yeah. But this is a very talented Georgia team, and it's an experienced squad. They've got Kirby Smart back as a head man, and I went with Georgia to win the East, but I think it's going to be I'm really anticipating that game in Jacksonville.
Yeah, it's one where I think you have so much talent, on both defensive lines, and Kirby does such a great job with the defense, and it's getting to the point where, they just reload just like Alabama does. And speaking of Alabama, you have them number 3, pretty much the unanimous pick to win the West right now. Mac Jones, I think, still has a lot to prove. His interception percentage wasn't great. I'll leave it at that last year in the limited time that he did play. But, you're hearing a lot of noise about Bryce Young as well. Do you think that this job is Mac Jones fully, that you believe he's going to be the quarterback all the way through for Alabama?
I'll be honest with you. I was leaning towards even picking Bryce Young as the quarterback, but then the lack of spring practice hurt the development, and I figured it's going to be tough for a true freshman to jump in there at the start of the year. But this could turn out to be like what happened with Clemson 2 years ago. Remember, Brian started the season, started the first 4 games, and then all of a sudden Trevor Lawrence took over, was the QB the rest of the year. I think Mac Jones is going to have to step on the field and produce. But the good news for whoever wins that starting job at Alabama is the talent they got surrounding him on offense. I mean, the offensive line, I'm a member of the Joe Moore Award Committee, which is for the top offensive line in college football. And after I came up with my offensive line ratings, I bounced them off the Joe Moore Award Committee, and I had Alabama rated number 1. I got 0 pushback. Those guys pretty much in agreement. Yeah. Bama might have the best offensive line in college football. They have my number 2 set of running backs in the country and number 3 set of receivers in the country. So that's pretty good surrounding talent for whichever quarterback takes over. And I did project Mac Jones to win the job at the start of the year, but like I said, he's going to have to produce, especially with all that surrounding talent. The thing I really think is going to be sneaky about Alabama this year is going to be their defense, because remember last year they had an All-American linebacker and Dylan Moses go down in the preseason, and Joshua McMillan went down as well. They had to play a couple of true freshmen and Shane Lee and Christian Harris at linebacker. Those guys returned their softs. They get back Moses. They get back McMillan. They had 3 freshmen starting on the defensive line, and Young, Barmore, and Dale last year. Those guys are all sophomores, and Nick Saban always works with that secondary pretty good, and he's got a cornerback in Patrick Surtain to build the secondary around. I think Alabama will have their usual top-notch defense, and they also have my number 4 rated special teams. So they are a complete team, and this just in, Jake, they will be favored in all their games this year.
Yeah, that's I think that's a safe bet, and again, with Nick there and the talent they bring in, especially up front, and you talk about being a line of scrimmage guy, I'm right there with you, and that's where the game's won and lost, and that's where Alabama's had a ton of success. And you just look at the way they're recruiting right now, and you can see, I mean, their offensive line class is maybe the best one in history. So again, they just continue to do it. But as we kind of wind down, and we're here with Phil Steele from philsteele.com. Make sure you get that 2020 college football preview. I promise it'll be worth it. And is there a team in the SEC, and I know I'm throwing a ton of SEC questions at you, but that may surprise people a little bit that maybe aren't giving them a chance because, Kentucky's the hot pick to be the underdog because of what they return and the momentum they have. But, you look at South Carolina, they return 4 out of 5 offensive linemen. They're leading defensive lineman in tackle for loss, and I believe third leading tackle for loss lineman on the team return. They return a decent amount on defense. They lose Javon Kinlaw, who was a great player. But, is South Carolina a team, or is there another team that you see that can maybe sneak up on some people?
Yeah, I'll throw 2 teams at you. One would be South Carolina. And once again, I'm discounting Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, because I think they're getting their amount of preseason hype this year. But when you do look at South Carolina, keep in mind, it's been an injury-plagued squad. And you go over the last 2 years, they just have suffered massive injuries, both sides of the football. Talked to Coach Muschamp this year, and he brings in a new strength and conditioning coach. So let's hope they stay healthier this year. I like the choices they have at quarterback with Ryan Helinski, who was thrown into the fire as a true freshman last year. And then Colin Hill, who comes over with Mike Bobo from Colorado State, where he did extremely well. And he's a veteran senior. Both guys can do well there. You look at the running back core, Marshawn Lloyd comes in, a highly touted true freshman. So Quandre White comes in as a JUCO running back. I think they're a nice 2-headed monster to have at running back. And then Muschamp feels this is the best offensive line he's had since he's been here. And I talked earlier about a team without a lot of big players starting every single game on defense. South Carolina's defense was hit hard by injuries last year, and a bulk of them returned. Now, the schedule doesn't get any easier. Last year they played the toughest schedule in the country. This year it looks like it's going to be about the 3rd toughest schedule. But, I think South Carolina can surprise if they stay healthier. But I think you're going to see a much improved offense. They only had 22.4 points per game last year. I think they're back up in the 30s this year, and that's going to help them out a lot. And then in the West, I'm going to say Ole Miss. And I really like the talent they have there. Look at all those true freshmen they had coming in. John Rice Plumlee played as a true freshman last year. Ely at running back, and loaded a lot of true freshmen. In fact, I was a little surprised they let Luke go after the recruiting class he had brought in and the production level they got. Lane Kiffin comes in. He's inheriting a pretty experienced team with 8 starters back on offense. If they can get that defense anywhere near up to speed, then they could be a bit of a surprise. I don't think they're going to pass up the big boys in the West, but I don't think Mississippi has any expectations this year, and it wouldn't surprise me to see with them flirting with a potential bowl.
Yeah, and I think those teams may sneak up and upset a team and ruin somebody's Christmas presents. I think South Carolina. South Carolina did it last year for Georgia. It's I think it's a repeatable thing. But Phil, man, I really appreciate you coming on. Just awesome stuff. Me and you, I could sit here and talk to you for 8 hours, man, and we could just talk about every team. But I know you definitely got other stuff to do. But please tell everybody where they can find your 2020 college football preview, because it's the best one in the business.
I appreciate that, Jake. Yeah, it's 352 pages, like getting 130 different media guides rolled into one. As I mentioned earlier, it is only available this year. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. So if you're used to driving around and getting it everywhere, we have a limited distribution this year. We only printed about 50,000 magazines. It's only available at Barnes & Noble or Books A Million. And if it's sold out at those places near you, you can go to the website, which is philsteele.com. That's Phil Steele, STEELE.com, and order the magazine. And if you order the magazine today, we'll ship it out today, as long as you order it in the morning. So that's philsteele.com, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million are the places to get the magazine this year.
Definitely, and it's I guarantee you my audience will probably run to the first Barnes & Noble they see to get it. But again, like I said, thank you so much for coming on. Would love to have you back. Hopefully we get some on-the-field stuff cracking soon and can focus on that.
Hey, a lot of fun talking football with you today, Jake. Really enjoyed it.
Hey, you too, Phil. Be safe out there, man. Thank you.
Thanks.
That was legend Phil Steele, former ESPN insider. Like I told you, he's a voter on over 20 college football awards. The top preview, if you're looking for information, if you're looking for angles, if you're looking for details, he does a fantastic job. You can find him on Twitter too, at Phil Steele. That's PHILSTEELE 042. And again, we really appreciate him coming on. As usual, appreciate you. You guys are the best audience in the business. Remember, You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at The Jboy Show. Remember, text JBOY to 90407, and you get the earliest predictions. And again, it's something that keeps growing, and we're really excited. Got some more huge announcements coming up. Thank you to the Investor Brand Network, the best PR team in the game, and Faison in the studio doing his thing. It's been another edition of The Jboy Show with college football insider legend, Phil Steele. All right, Jboy is going. Gone.